for many of us who've had the opportunity to know her and spend time with her, I really view her as a woodside treasure and someone that should be recognized for all of and we know her offspring, they're everywhere. Usually in the police blotter. No, I'm only kidding. But they're amazing. And so this evening she's going to be talking about open space. And open space is really important. Most of us who have come to live in this area are doing it because we care about open space. We care about the environment, about trees and things like that. So I want to start us off with a little quote here. And I'm going to ask you do you think you know who this quote might be from? Clean air, clean water, open spaces, these should once again be the birthright of every American.
FDR. Just kidding.
John Muir. No.
No, you would think.
Not Richard
It
Nixon.
was the president.
Richard Nixon.
Richard Nixon. Yeah, I know. Shock. Without further ado.
Richard Nixon. Thanks a lot for coming out tonight, Friday night, to hear about open space. My favorite thing. So it's great to see you, and I'm hoping you'll find what I have to say interesting. I actually did enjoy putting it all together. So I thought I'd start by reflecting on the evolution of my interest in the environment. So, back to the 70s, when my then hippie husband persuaded me that all I really wanted to do with my life was to move to the country and live off the land. So when 40 ridgetop acres opened up in San Mateo County, 2 miles west of Skyline, in an area that PG&E had forgotten about and the loggers had abandoned, we jumped at the opportunity. We considered ourselves environmentalists in the most basic sense. We would have a simple, sustainable lifestyle that included wood stove cooking, a windmill to pump the water. We'd garden organically, all the while living in a barn, converted from the old logging equipment shed. And for electricity, we had an extra 12-volt battery in our truck that we would plug into the house every night to give us a few low-voltage lights and, more importantly, a 12-volt blender for margaritas. The rationale being that the truck would charge the battery when we drove anywhere. Unfortunately, we blew several alternators and had to start looking elsewhere for power. By 1980, Jimmy Carter had made a valiant attempt to introduce America to solar power, but to no avail. And so we were able to get a hold of 3 very low-power Arco solar panels that PG&E had abandoned from their first solar project in the desert. Quite an upgrade for us. Other alternative living ideas we were enamored with, well, we soon discovered why the indigenous people had lived off acorns and huckleberries. Between the myriad hungry creatures both above and below ground and the fickle weather of the Skyline area, our production of row crops was dismal. Plus the wind doesn't blow in summer, so very little water. And cooking on wood, well, I actually got pretty good at it. But my poor kids did eat a lot of bananas and yogurt. So we moved on with our lives, taking normal jobs and raising a family. And this is what that place looks like today. Pretty amazing. 45 years in the making. But I never stopped being in awe of the beautiful and natural place that had inadvertently fallen into our laps. The hills are green in spring, golden in summer, and sometimes white with a dusting of snow in the winter. Raptors catch for thermals and float lazily overhead. One never tires of watching the Pacific fog rolling in. Sunsets are magnificent, as are the sunrises, when shafts of silver and gold light pour through the retreating fog. It is a privilege to be surrounded by such glorious nature. And so began the next phase of my environmental journey. I recognized the importance of open space protection, right in my front yard. Back then, my ideas on protection were somewhat rudimentary and revolved around habitat preservation. I would spend hours pulling the non-native invasive thistle and French broom that had started to encroach on the grasslands that dominated Long Ridge. To this day, I still see every thistle on the side of the road. But driving to Palo Alto in those early years, I watched as houses started to spring up, starting along Lower Page Mill Road and creeping up towards Skyline. And one day I came home and I noticed 3 wellheads being drilled on the vacant Skyline property immediately adjacent to our house. I couldn't help thinking about the potential for building and resigned myself to more houses and other development finally reaching my neighborhood. Well, nothing happened. It turned out that the recently formed Midpeninsula Regional Open Space District was busy buying up undeveloped property along Skyline, and our neighbors' 300 acres were some of the first to become what is now Long Ridge Open Space Preserve. I was relieved, but I didn't really do anything about it, except maybe do more school gardens and take the kids on nature hikes. So let's diverge for a bit. I've put together a brief history of San Mateo and Santa Clara counties to show you how we got to where we are today. The history is rich and varied and goes back some 10,000 years to when the area was settled by the Ohlone Indian tribes. For food, the people gathered acorns and huckleberries from forests, grass seeds from open grasslands, and oysters from the bay. They lived lightly on the land, and the grasslands and forests thrived thanks to their land management techniques and controlled burning practice. Then, some 250 years ago, the Spaniard Gaspar de Portola led his group of explorers north from Baja, California. He crossed Pescadero and San Gregorio Creeks in San Mateo County. And we now know that in 1769 he arrived on Sweeney Ridge and was the first European to see San Francisco Bay. That's Mount Diablo in the background there. Subsequent settlement in the Bay Area, including the sad era of missions, can be traced to this discovery. Then, in 1820, when Mexico gained its independence from Spain and took over California, they closed the missions, called themselves Californios, and started making huge land grants to people of Mexican descent. These ranchero families lived in adobe houses and used their land for cattle ranching. Prior to the gold rush, cattle hides were California's main export for shoes, for leather shoes in Boston, if you've read 2 years before the mast. So increasingly, California was becoming an agricultural society, and grasslands and much of the natural biodiversity remained intact. By the 1850s, a lot of people had come to California to prospect for gold, but many came to seek other riches, namely food and clothing. In those days, agriculture revolved around dairy farming, as the demand for milk grew into a lucrative business. By the mid-1880s, San Mateo had become a prominent milk-producing county, with many dairy farms prevalent along the coast. The coastal grasslands were ideally suited for raising cattle, hence the flourishing dairy industry. By the early 1900s, farmers had discovered the climate of the San Mateo coast, along with its rich soils, was also ideally suited for growing artichokes, and row crop farming became prevalent. Here is the Ag Report from 1940. Peas, lettuce, artichokes, Brussels sprouts, and cabbage. I've met some farmers through my work with the Midpen, and they still remember peas growing on the hillsides. Yeah. There were even farms in downtown San Mateo. And flowers were grown on the peninsula, and orchards covered landscapes, especially in Santa Clara County, which became known as the Valley of the Heart's Delight. Until the 1950s, all this farming kept the Bay Area pretty rural, and much of the natural biodiversity of the San Mateo and Santa Clara counties continued to remain intact. This was Colma just over 100 years ago. But progress was on the way, and after the war, crowds of people descended on California by air, by rail, and logging continued to destroy old-growth redwoods. A lot of land that had been used mostly for logging and farming grew up into cities and towns to accommodate the burgeoning population. Another consequence, they had to get rid of their trash. This was a dump off Skyline. It's called Skyline Dump. And there was also trash dumped over the hillside, but I don't think much has changed. I still see a lot of trash. Some thought growth was getting out of hand and recognized the need for government oversight. Planning commissions were formed, but the age-old question remained: do you want to preserve the land and protect the natural resources, or do you want to pursue economic and social development? Or is there a balance? Well, back then, economic growth ruled, and the land, which had been used mostly for logging and farming, sprouted into cities and towns. The farmlands and forests, as well as the natural habitats and the ecological diversity so unique to California, began to disappear. In 1960, planners and developers and speculators put forward this bold plan to transform the Bay Area into a mega metropolis, which would have filled in much of the bay, run freeways over the mountain ranges, and threatened coastal areas, all to accommodate autocentric sprawl. So why is it that the San Mateo coast is still pretty rural? Enter the early environmental movement. If you do an internet search for environmental issues in 1962, you will find buried in the over 4 million hits variations on the following statement. Committee for Green Foothills began in the Spangenberg living room in Palo Alto in 1962, with Ruth Spangenberg serving as vice president and Wallace Stegner serving as president. In 2011, I attended Ruth's memorial service in Palo Alto and learned more about this remarkable woman's life, her love for her community, and her involvement in local growth issues as a young widow raising 6 kids in the 60s. The stories I heard that day got me thinking back 60 years when the environmental movement was in its infancy. What was going on in 1962? And what were the events shaping the future of the natural world that would bring out a passion to advocate for the protection of natural and open spaces? Turns out that at that time, the Palo Alto City Council was set to vote on approving a large industrial development project on Stanford lands between Page Mill and Arastradero roads. The community of Palo Alto was divided between those people who wanted to encourage local growth and development and develop Stanford Industrial Park up into the foothills, and those who valued the beauty of local open space and wanted it to remain in its natural state. There was a concern that all of the peninsula foothills would disappear if a more concerted effort was not made to save them. These early environmentally aware citizens were urging a divided city council to not approve the permits for the park. They even prepared a vote no leaflet to inform the community of the issues at hand. Among those who took action were Ruth Spangenberg and Lois Hogel, shown in this picture here. So at Ruth's memorial, we heard the delightful story of Ruth attending a formal faculty dinner at Stanford with these anti-development leaflets pinned all over her gown, to the consternation of her husband, a prominent professor at the university. Unfortunately, the council approved the development. Well, we see it today. So Ruth's group regrouped. They decided to start a nonprofit dedicated to preserving local nature. On a May evening in 1962, more than 24 of Ruth's friends and neighbors gathered in the living room of her Page Mill home. They were housewives, engineers, teachers, architects, writers who believed a balance needed to be struck between development and open space. And that night, the Committee for Green Foothills was born. We were a group with 20/20 vision, said the co-founding member Lois Crozier-Hogel, who organized that fateful meeting. If one thing bound us together, it was our determination to save the foothills for our children and grandchildren. And that's where I am. Development was coming fast, and if we were going to save the foothills, we needed to do it right then. So they organized a picnic up on Skyline to announce the organization, which is still going strong 62 years later. I still pull thistles, but my stint on the board of the Committee for Green Foothills taught me an even more important aspect of environmentalism: advocacy and outreach. We can do so much by influencing our political leaders to make land use policy choices that preserve the quality of our life and natural surroundings, and are eternally grateful that Green Foothills has taken that leadership role in San Mateo and Santa Clara County for the past 60 years. As Lois said all those years ago, the words of the future for the future are eternal vigilance. Moving forward to 1970 and to another Palo Alto living room, this time that of one Nonette Hanker, mother of 4, aspiring concert pianist and environmentalist at heart. Stanford's proposed development of Coyote Hill and a nasty recall of Palo Alto City Council members began drawing Hanko out to public meetings. Meantime, Palo Alto Times reporter Jay Thorwaldson had published an editorial stating that conservationists wanting to preserve land on the rapidly developing Midpeninsula should create a public agency capable of acquiring land, as had been done in the East Bay. These words inspired Nonette to plan that meeting in her Palo Alto living room. I'd lost the places I'd had as a little girl in Palo Alto, she said. In Palo Alto, there were no trespassing signs all the way up to Skyline. When Jay's editorial came out, I took it seriously and said to myself, here's an idea that could be used, why not? And Hanko remained the consistent force behind getting Measure R, the Room to Breathe initiative, on Santa Clara County's ballot in 1972, allowing voters to create the Midpeninsula Regional Park District. The measure passed with 67.7% approval. Here is the Measure R language. Measure R will preserve open space, blah, 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 blah. It is room to breathe. In 1975, San Mateo County electorate voted to extend the district boundaries beyond Santa Clara County and into San Mateo County. And then in 2004, Midpen expanded all the way to the coast, using the protections provided by the California Coastal Act of 1972. The coastal region of the district is referred to as the Coastal Protection Area and has a slightly different set of rules from the rest of the district. So Midpen has a mission, which is to acquire and preserve a regional green belt. It's basically three-pronged: acquire and preserve land, protect and restore land, and provide opportunities for ecologically sensitive public enjoyment and education. When the Coastal Protection Area was added, the mission was expanded to include preserve rural character, that's at the bottom here, and encourage viable agricultural use of coastal lands. One early change to the district was to get a new name, and this was done to better reflect the mission of preservation, and basically means that nature rules. No campgrounds, no picnic tables, toilets are compost toilets, natural-looking parking lots, just plain stuff like my backyard. So I thought that was a pretty good change. It was done early on. So here is the district map. The population of this area is roughly 770,000 people. There are 7 board members, divided equally by population among 7 wards. My ward is this green one here, the light green one, somewhat gerrymandered to account for the population. And it goes all the way from the bay at the top there, comes down, goes over skyline and through all the foothills and down to the coast. So it's the best. It's the best. Midpen is set up as a special district. What is a special district? I don't know. A special district is a voter-approved, limited-purpose local government separate from city and county governments. Within the boundaries, special districts provide focused public service such as fire protection, sewers, water supply, electricity, parks, and libraries. They are funded with a voter-approved self-imposed tax or special assessment, and it's usually assessed and paid through property taxes. Special districts operate just like government agencies with an elected board of directors. They hold public meetings which are subject to Brown Act rules, and they're run by policy. The key to special districts is their stable source of funding through property tax. Also, and most importantly for Midpen, this means that our lands are public lands. Midpen doesn't own the land, the public does. You could say Midpen's part in all this is to be the caretaker of board-approved policies and decisions which guide staff's work. So where does post fit in? There is a difference, but no Palo Alto living room for the formation of this one. In 1977, Herb Grench, Midpeninsula's first general manager, realized that government work is a slow and cumbersome process. It can take many years for a land deal to come to fruition. He proposed forming a non-profit land trust to work privately with those landowners who were reluctant to deal with government agencies, such as Midpen. The non-profit would also raise money to supplement public funding for land conservation. And with that, Peninsula Open Space Trust was born. For 25 years, Audrey Rust was instrumental in the permanent protection of thousands of acres of open space across the peninsula and San Mateo coast. She is widely recognized as a conservation leader and champion across the country. In addition to its confidential work with private landowners, Post partners closely with many public agencies, including Midpen, to create a strong, effective network of conserved lands that benefit all in perpetuity. Their first acquisition for Midpen was part of what is now Windy Hill Open Space Preserve. Today, there are some 73,000 acres in the district that are preserved and protected from development. That's all these dark greens down here. There are 27 open space preserves, and most of them are open to the public. Public access to these lands is encouraged, but limited to nature-friendly uses. When the land is open to the public, access is free, and hikers are allowed on all the trails. Currently, there's 250 miles of trails. Bikes are allowed on about 2/3 of the trails, but not e-bikes. Sorry, Dale. There are a couple of e-bike exceptions on those shorter trails that connect other trails that allow e-bikes. And so it helps out with commuting. And then there are some preserves with trails that allow horses and dogs. As I previously mentioned, there are 27 open space preserves. The first one was this one, Foothills Open Space Preserve on Page Mill Road, some 200 acres adjacent to Hidden Villa. There is a handy-dandy publication, and I bought several copies, which are in the back, for you to take if you want one. So I thought I would just give you some eye candy. We'll start at the bay. We have a couple of preserves on the bay. Ravenswood is one. It's a birder's paradise, and there's a small nature study area at Stevens Creek. And then Rancho San Antonio Open Space Preserve, the most popular one, has the most visitors, the worst parking. Pulgus Ridge is a very pleasant surprise. It's off 280. It's 366 acres with 5 miles of trails for hiking, and dogs are allowed. In fact, there are 17 acres of off-leash area located in the center of the preserve. The wildflowers are amazing for such an urban area. Indian warrior, hound's tongue, mule's ears, and milkmaids, and my favorite, fetid adder's tongue. Thornwood, local to Woodside. There are 12 miles of trails for hiking, horses and dogs on leash. And also in Woodside, Teague Hill Open Space Preserve, which is actually located between Huddard and Wunderlich. It's not open to the public, but there is a short stretch of the Bay Area Ridge Trail off Kings Mountain Road that runs through it. And then coming up the bay, this is Cupertino area, Fremont Older, Piketty Ranch, and then on Skyline, the beautiful Porissima Creek Redwoods Open Space Preserve, which now pretty much goes down to the coast. El Corte Madera Open Space Preserve, Bicycles Paradise, Windy Hill Open Space Preserve, Russian Ridge, where the wildflowers are just starting to come on out. It's really pretty. Montebello Open Space Preserve, Saratoga Gap, Bear Creek Redwoods. This is a fairly new one. Well, newly expanded, I guess. And St. Joseph Hill. We're getting down to the hot Los Gatos area now. El Sereno and Sierra Azul, which is where Mount Amanam is. You can see the radar tower up there. Then going down towards the coast, we have La Honda Creek Open Space Preserve, which is where the Red Barn is. And this is my favorite, Cloverdale Ranch, which was acquired a couple of years ago, and it's an ecological jewel. The vast landscape, it's 3,000 acres. In fact, I opened my Midpen email today, and there was the closing papers on the purchase of this. Yeah, it was a good job. The vast landscape includes large tracts of biologically rich coastal grassland and coastal scrub habitats that support a rich community of rare native plants and wildlife. So this preserve is not open to the public yet. It will take time for staff to get all their ducks in order and go through the public process to get all the policies together to create public access. There needs to be a balance between environmental protection, agricultural needs, and community needs. In the interim, there is one trail, it's called the Wilbur's Watch Trail, that is open to the public. And it traverses coastal scrub and grasslands from Pigeon Point Road, which is off Highway 1, to a lookout point for viewing the coastline and the lighthouse. Cloverdale Ranch is intertwined with a rich agricultural heritage on the San Mateo County coast that continues to this day. There are 2 grazing leases on this property. Grazing helps enhance the preserve's coastal grasslands and the native plants and wildlife that need these open spaces. More on that later. Midpen does much more than just acquire land and preserve it. In addition to land preservation, we can add species and natural resource protection. So many species of special concern, that is endangered, are found on Midpen lands. Following are some examples of how Midpen is working to preserve them. Here is the beautiful San Francisco garter snake found at Cloverdale Ranch, hence the limited public access on that preserve. Turns out that the San Francisco garter snake loves to eat another endangered species, the red-legged frog, which is also found on many Midpen preserves. Go figure. But basically, by restoring cattle stock ponds for the frogs, Midpen is providing food for the snakes, and Midpen is letting nature do its snake-frog balancing act. Oh, cute little salt marsh mouse down at the bay. And the kangaroo rat, a real cutie. Look at that tail. They just didn't think they existed anymore, but they find them. and now they know what habitat to look for to find more. And the purple martin, these are a great find that they found up at Mount Amanam. They're a large swallow, and the males have iridescent purple feathers. The species was thought to have disappeared from the county until Midpen began their restoration work at Mount Amanam and saw the acrobatic avians overhead, nesting in old utility poles. So they set up brood boxes in a way to mimic what they were seeing in the wild. And after some trial and error, this is what they found. 4 little babies. And I think they've done pretty well in the last couple of years. Believe it or not, badgers are found on open grasslands off Skyline. They love to eat gophers, and they live in large burrows which they dig with their very strong webbed front feet. You can distinguish a badger hole from a fox hole by the large and distinct pile of dirt in front of the opening. They are nocturnal animals, not often seen, but they've been observed with infrared camera at Long Ridge and Russian Ridge preserves. Badgers are migratory animals and soon move on from their nests. And when they leave, burrowing owls have been found to take over. Adorable. Mountain lions, not such an easy species to protect. They are top of the food chain and will eat any and all of our 4-legged friends, including cattle, which upsets the ranchers, and dogs and goats, which upsets the neighbors. Midpen partners with the Santa Cruz Puma Project to study and understand mountain lion habitats and behavior. It would be great if humans and mountain lions could coexist. One of the sad things about mountain lions is that they need a large territory, and they wander over several hundred acres, each looking for food and to find a mate. In so doing, it's inevitable that they cross busy highways, and they often don't survive, and nor does the car. One of Midpen's protections for mountain lions is to provide safe highway crossings. Safe and secure habitat connectivity helps maintain healthy wildlife population, which in turn improves the genetic diversity of the local population. In fact, California in general has started to invest heavily in wildlife crossings. Midpen is partnering with Caltrans and the VTA, the Valley Transport Authority, to build such a crossing near Lexington Reservoir. The undercrossing, so let's see, this is 17's Purple Road down here with the Lexington Reservoir, and there's 17 on the right. You can see a culvert appearing underneath the highway, and that's right now it's not a very big culvert, and that's going to be made into a big culvert. So the animals will come down the hill from here, down there, and underneath here, and then continue on through Los Gatos and down to Amanam. Not only lions, but deer, mostly. There's another one on Highway 17. It is at the Laurel Curve, and they've seen mountain lions and tons of deer and badgers and all sorts of things there. So this particular project is going to serve double duty, because they're going to build a trail crossing over Highway 17 and connect the open space on either side of the highway. This is Midpen's most ambitious project to date, at $40 million. It's funded by $13 million in Measure AA funds and $6 million in various grants from the state of California, the Wildlife Conservation Board, and the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation. Unfortunately, some $20 million originally expected from the federal government has still to be raised. So who knows? Construction's slated for 2027 anyway, 2027. They're also trying to save newts. Alma Bridge Road down at Lexington Reservoir. This project was brought to Midpen's attention by concerned neighbors. There's Alma Road down on the right-hand side of the reservoir, and all those red areas are high newt death traps. It turns out, they've studied this, that 40% of the newts don't cross the road. And at that rate, the newts are going to die out in 50 years' time. So they got the county of Santa Clara together, and they're building a special kind of road. The road needs to be replaced anyway. And it will funnel the newts into little tunnels with grates over them. So we'll see if it works. Moving on from critters, here is a great example of a well-managed California coastal grassland, a diverse and very important habitat, and a complex ecosystem that supports a wealth of flora and fauna. These biologically rich areas have supported a way of life for generations, that is, cattle ranching. But our coastal grasslands are disappearing. Coyote brush and non-native invasives such as French broom and thistles are thriving. Left untreated, dry fuel loads will build up, not only increasing the risk and severity of wildfire, but also crowding out many plants, thereby reducing biodiversity. So how does the district manage their grasslands? Well, mowing where possible, but it's pretty expensive on steep hillsides. So over to the cows and Midpen's conservation grazing program. They let the cows do the work of cutting down the grass through a program known as conservation grazing. Conservation grazing maintains and restores native grasslands and their unique biodiversity. It also manages vegetation to reduce wildland fire risk, and it supports the agriculture on the San Mateo coast, which is what Midpen wants to do. The district manages over 11,000 acres of cattle grazing lands in San Mateo County. A rangeland management plan is developed specifically for each grazing lease, determining the number and type of livestock, as well as the annual grazing duration. For their part, Midpen provides appropriate infrastructure, water troughs, corrals, as well as wildlife-friendly fencing to keep the livestock on the property and out of creek beds. Other options to reduce fuel include controlled burning, which the Ohlone people did, but today it's a little dangerous, and a nightmare with permitting and stuff. But they're very proud, Midpen is very proud of the 13 acres that they burned in the fall. Myself, I think that controlled burning is a useful way to get rid of burn piles after manual clearing. Which brings us to wildfire. Midpen actively assisted in the CAL FIRE's response to the 2020 CZU lightning complex fire. Here's the picture of a Midpen staff member helping to hold the line at Old Hall Road in La Honda. This wildfire underscored the need for Midpen to enhance its fuel reduction efforts, while at the same time they want to protect the biodiversity. So, here is a map of the San Mateo fire severity zone, and it's high. Even though none of the CZU fire actually burned on Midpen lands, with 73,000 open space acres in this severity zone, the district takes their wildland fire resiliency program very seriously. Midpen does not have its own fire department, but it has a fire program to protect public open lands, habitat, and sensitive natural resources. And these are fuel reduction for fuel breaks and defensible space, and they do it in such a way that they maintain the ecological health of the forest. So you can see there's a biologist there studying a tree. They don't just cut everything down. The district also partners with many fire districts and fire-safe councils to share documents and maps showing where the roads, gates, and any water sources are on the Midpen lands. And there is a monitoring program with records to see how things are going. And always on the back bar is the prescribed fire plan. This slide shows, if you can see it, the guy checking the trees. In the middle is what it was like before, and on the right it's what it looks like now. It actually looks kind of nice. Unhealthy and dead trees add to the flammable fuel load. A healthy forest is less prone to lightning strikes and rapidly moving wildfire. So Midpen is undergoing a pilot program in La Honda, which proposes to remove basically dead, unhealthy, and excess trees from an area of about 1,800 acres in the La Honda Open Space Preserve along Route 84. This lowers the fuel load and makes the forest more healthy by opening it up. Each tree, believe it or not, will be individually evaluated and removed depending on its age, size, and health. There's a whole science to this approach. They're also doing this in the Los Gatos Creek watershed. I don't know if you remember the devastating Lexington Reservoir fire back in 1985. 14,000 acres and 42 homes burned. CAL FIRE has awarded $6 million to Santa Clara County Fire Safe Council to lead a forest restoration program in the Los Gatos Creek watershed, and Midpen is one of those partners. The goal is to protect the upper watershed so that the water supplies remain intact, reduce the severity of potential wildfire, and establish healthy, resilient, fire-adapted ecosystems. It's a sad situation. After numerous sick animals were observed on Midpen preserves around 2013, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, with the assistance from Midpen staff, linked the illness and death of many bobcats to second-generation anticoagulant rodenticides. The animals suffer from a nasty mange, which is particularly prevalent in Rancho San Antonio. Midpen has begun educating preserve neighbors about the effects of commonly available pesticides and rodenticides on wildlife, and has joined with an ongoing effort to lobby the state of California in limiting their use. In June 2014, we all very nicely approved Measure AA, a 30-year, $300 million general obligation bond to protect natural and working lands, open preserved lands to the public, construct public access improvements such as new trails and parking and staging areas, and restore and enhance open space land, forests, streams, watersheds, and coastal ranch areas. Basically gave Midpen money to steward the lands that they had bought. They divided it up into 26 projects, and progress has been steady and remarkably on target. 1/3 of the way on, which we're about 1/3 the way on now, 1/3 of the funds have been spent, and 1/3 of the projects completed. So that's it, and thank you for your support.
I want to remind you that this evening's program is sponsored by the Woodside Arts and Culture Committee. We have a musical event with some of our favorites. Yeager and Reed are coming back, wonderful folk music, so hopefully you'll be back for that program. And thank you again for coming this evening, and thank you. Margaret.